Uh, Welcome to Sydney. Hello, everyone. I'm Renat Akhmerov, working for Nokia. I'm the Mistral PTL, and I just want to give you a quick update on the project, what was done in Pike cycle and what we're planning to do next in Queens and beyond Queens. So just in case if you don't know what Mistral is, so just very briefly, Mistral is a workflow service. It allows you to build, manage, and manage distributed processes within the cloud environment or any other distributed environment. So, and it has right now a pretty big community, a lot of contributors, a lot of users. So I'm going to cover some features that we added during Pike cycle, some achievements that we made. So basically, one of the important things that we were working on was the custom actions API. So if you're familiar with Mistral concepts and the data model, so you probably know that basically Mistral allows to create custom actions. Basically, up until recently, it was pretty non-structured way of doing this custom actions development, meaning that basically we had some classes within the main Mistral repo, Mistral source code, and users who wanted to create custom actions just had to inherit from those classes, and basically was not really convenient because it was not even obvious what they could use and what they could not use because what kind of dependencies they could use. So basically, we finally decided some time ago, to make it clear, more structured, and we decided to create a separate tiny library that users can just add as a dependency, where we could have all the base classes, all the facilities to develop new custom actions. So, and that work has been going on for about a year probably, and finally we completed our first version, I would call it. So there is still some work going on related to that, but most of the things are established right now. So, and we refactored the Mistral source code itself to use that library, which we called Mistral lib. So we're also planning, some activity related to that. Basically, we're also planning to move all our OpenStack actions out of the main repo, Mistral repo, to the separate repo and refactor them using this Mistral library, using this custom actions API code. Basically, so we have the repository called Mistral Extra, where we initially had a number of examples of Mistral workflows, and where we tried to show some typical use cases that could be automated with Mistral. So, and we decided that this repo is going to be like a storage for all kind of integration things, including different kinds of actions, and including OpenStack actions. So that's one thing. Is one interesting thing that we also added during Pike cycle is basically right now Mistral can run its actions without any remote executors at all. So because the typical topology that we always had was a number of Mistral engines that we could run them pretty much any time, any number of them. Of course, and there are certain considerations on how to scale and how to configure the topologies and stuff like that. But besides Mistral engines, we had to run separate Mistral executors, what we call them. Executors basically are components that run Mistral actions. So, and now we decided to add what we call a local executor, so which run right in the engine essentially, so that there is no RPC messaging involved into that anymore. So it's up to the user, up to the operator actually, how to configure that. So we can use a local executor or a remote executor, or I think even both, if I'm not mistaken. So it makes sense in many cases when we understand that most of our actions are relatively light, simple. So in the RPC messaging overhead is just too much for transferring actions to run on some remote component. So we also add namespaces, workflow namespaces basically. So there was a requirement within our company to have actually multiple workflows with the same name, split it by some additional concept which we eventually called namespaces. Basically now we can create, we can have multiple namespaces, and within the namespace we can have uniquely named workflows. So, but they can repeat if we take, for example, 2 namespaces. So basically just an additional key how to identify workflow definitions. We also improved significantly workflow publishing mechanisms. So basically, up until recently, we could only publish workflow variables in the workflow branch. So basically, if we have multiple workflow branches or routes, whatever you call them, and if one task in a particular branch published a certain workflow variable, it would only be accessible downstream the same branch. So basically, until you hit the join operation, which synchronizes multiple branches. So now there is a notion of global scope where you could publish variables from any branch, and it should be accessible from basically anywhere. OpenStack actions now can run against multiple regions, so there is a certain parameter for that. We also made a number of stability performance improvements, and this work is really ongoing, and it's we keep improving Mistral performance. So like this year it was improved probably like 50% again. So and one of the major things that we've done is that we finally open sourced the standalone Mistral GUI, which is called Cloudflow, which was initially developed within Nokia by our engineers. So now it's open source, and we invite everyone to contribute and help with the development. And this is just a screenshot of Cloudflow, and I would really recommend to try it if you're using Mistral actively. This should be really helpful to you in terms of analyzing your workflows, and you can use it as a monitoring tool to basically investigate errors if they happen during the workflow execution, and so on. So it's really usable already, even though we know that we need to do much more in terms of usability, convenience. We need to add certain things like running workflows right from Cloudflow UI, add some recovery mechanisms for workflows and stuff like that, but it's already pretty useful, and we're using it in production already. So as far as what we're planning to do in Queens, we keep improving multi-node mode and HA. I intentionally call it multi-node mode because like there is a sometimes people understand those terms like differently: HA, scalability, and fault tolerance. So right now, what we've managed to do basically is internally we run Mistral with up to like 10 engines, and we run really huge workflows consisting of like hundreds and maybe in some cases even thousands of tasks. with 10 engines, and those engines are able to work seamlessly, so balanced load. And this configuration is pretty stable, so it works pretty well. We test it with remote executors, with local executors, basically in all kinds of situations. What's not really done yet is we didn't account for topology, cluster topology changes yet. So it's going to work pretty well, and we've done some tests on that as well. With the positive changes when we add nodes to the cluster. So basically, that's the situation we can gracefully handle. But we're definitely aware of some problems where when some cluster nodes can leave the cluster, and we may end up with some inconsistent states. So which happens not really often, even if basically something leaves the cluster, some nodes, engine or executor, but it still happens, and this is something that I honestly tell users and our contributors that we're aware of that. We keep improving that part. So internally within our company, it's basically one of the main focuses right now. I'm personally working on that as well. So one of the big things that we're still missing in terms of functionality is basically securing sensitive workflow data. So what that means is basically if, for example, user needs to design a workflow that uses some data that should not be disclosed, we have a slight problem with that. So of course, there is always like mechanisms how to work around that, but basically what I'm talking about is basically we are missing some functionality that would allow to do it naturally, to have some kind of integration with something that would allow to keep your data safe, so some sensitive data, passwords, keys, whatever. So seems like in Denver at the last PDG, we came to agreement about the solution, and some of our team members are now prototyping the solution. So it's going to be just an integration with some third-party technologies. So we're considering Barbican or in a simpler way, Castellan, which is a library that Barbican uses. And we're targeting to accomplish at least like the first prototype of that during Queens. We're also working on workflow notification mechanism. So basically the idea is when the workflow is running, we need some mechanism to subscribe to the certain workflow events so that we could react on those events somehow. Like for example, I want to write my third-party tool that listens to certain workflow events, and let's say when certain workflow fails with an error, we need to do something about it. So of course there is always polling that's always available, and we can just poll the REST API all the time, but of course it's not scalable. It's not the best possible solution. The work is mostly done, so there is a big patch and review right now that we're now considering to merge. And there's also one big thing that, a big area where I would like to improve our system like significantly is of course usability and documentation. So as far as documentation, we've done a lot during like last year and a half, and it's now something that people can really use. It's not maybe like 100% consistent, and it may have some small gaps, but basically it's already usable. In terms of usability, we'd like to improve our CLI, our API. There is a big area, and I'm just jumping to the next slide. related to how we create custom actions. So I already mentioned that we came up with what we call the custom actions API, where user clearly sees what they can use in terms of what classes, what APIs to develop new custom actions. But I believe there should be like a lot of additional tools that help build actions more conveniently. Meaning, like, for example, if I want to build a new action package for Mistral, so what's the first step that I need to make? So as a user, I would like to see it something like, okay, I click the button, which creates me a skeleton project for my action pack, maybe using a cookie cutter or something similar. And I have like a couple of example actions, and I have all the configuration files already pre-configured, and it should be clear and simple how to plug in new actions to Mistral using Stevedore or whatever. So right now, sometimes users have problems with that, and I believe we can do much more on that. And also, one of the things that we're keep looking for basically is how to make our actions, our Mistral actions, more dynamic. So right now, there is only one mechanism to plug in new actions. Is basically just to write the Python code, shut down Mistral, and actually install our project containing actions, and it will use a Stevedore to plug in new actions. So it's pretty, it's not really flexible and dynamic way probably. So we would like to find maybe some more flexible ways of adding actions to Mistral. So like, for example, we were considering the idea of action providers, where we could simply configure Mistral plugins responsible for delivering actions to Mistral, so that once we developed our action provider, it's up to it how to deliver new actions. So it could be they could be requested from some dynamic storage, where we could add actions dynamically and stuff like that, so that they appear in the Mistral workflow language automatically. So anyway, there is a number of ideas that we're considering, and it's about high time that we needed to start working on that. So one of the long-term goals actually also is to come up with a number of integrations with other projects, like Zakar. So we already have some minor integration with Zakar. Like, for example, we support Zakar actions within Mistral workflows, but I believe there should be much more than that. Like I mentioned, there should be integration with Barbican, Castellan, and we're also considering to use Glare as the workflow definition storage. And these are the goals we set up for this year, just for information. And like I mentioned before, so reducing average workflow execution time is basically already achieved. So I think I'm running out of time already, so I would like to leave a couple of minutes for questions, maybe, if you have. So you can find us anytime in our RC channel, any available channel actually you would prefer. So if you have any questions, please go ahead. No. Awesome. Thank you.